The morning they cut the ribbon on the resort, with champagne spraying and news cameras flashing, I stood there grinning like a kid who just pulled off the biggest prank. Not because I was thrilled about the monstrosity the HOA had slapped together on my lake, but because in exactly 7 months, I'd sell the whole thing out from under them for hundreds of millions. My name's Tom Harper, and this is how I turned a quiet lakeside dream into a fortune and buried a greedy empire in the process. When I first saw Clearwater Lake, it was like stepping into a postcard. The water shimmered in soft blues and greens, fringed by dense woods and weathered docks sinking into the mud like old bones. The air smelled of damp earth and pine, with a stillness that felt ancient, untouched by the world's chaos. I knew instantly I'd spend my life here if I could. It took me 30 years, brown bag lunches, no vacations, and endless overtime, but I finally saved enough. The property was modest, an acre with a sliver of waterfront, a sagging fishing shack, and a dock that creaked with every breeze. No mortgage, no landlord, just mine. The seller, an old man named Henry Voss, had lived there his whole life, fishing the lake with his dad decades before. As we shook hands on the deal, he warned me about snapping turtles in the North Cove and shared the lake's only rule: respect it, and it'll respect you back. No one mentioned an HOA. The deed was clean, or so I thought. Those first months were paradise. I'd paddle my battered canoe at dawn, mist curling off the water like spirits. Afternoons, I'd clear trails or chop firewood. Nights, I'd watch stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. My neighbors, mostly old-timers like Henry, kept to themselves, offering a wave but little else. It was perfect until the newcomers rolled in. It started small. Gleaming SUVs churned up the gravel road. Hammers and saws echoed day and night. Where trees once stood, oversized houses sprouted. Stone chimneys, sprawling decks, crammed right up to the water's edge. These new folks wore designer clothes, barked into phones about investments, and acted like they'd invented the lake. Soon, whispers spread about an improvement plan led by Victor Lang, a real estate tycoon with a tan that looked painted on. Before we knew it, glossy packets circulated promising to preserve the lake under a new HOA called Crystal Cove. The fine print was chilling. Mandatory dues, rules on everything from grass length to paint colors, and worst of all, a claim that the lake itself was common property under their control. I laughed at first. My deed, like those of the old families, said nothing about an HOA. The idea that they could just declare a lake theirs was absurd. I refused to sign their papers, as did a few others. But Victor had been busy, collecting signatures from the newcomers who now outnumbered us. A sneaky township rule let a supermajority of lakefront owners impose an HOA retroactively. They had the votes, the lawyers, and the nerve. 2 weeks later, I got a welcome to Crystal Cove packet with a $3,200 annual dues bill. I burned it on my stove. Then the workers showed up. Without a word, they dumped lumber and concrete on my shore, claiming they were building a community pier for resident enjoyment. I called the township, then the county, but got nowhere. A week later, a tacky sign went up on my dock. Crystal Cove Lakefront Park, residents only. Fines started arriving, $500 for unkempt vegetation. Never mind that it was wildflowers older than my shack. When I called the HOA, a chipper voice told me to take it up with their compliance department, and hung up. I tried reasoning with neighbors, but most were too busy planning lakeside parties to care. Every week brought new violations, new fines, and smug emails threatening legal remedies. At a town hall, Victor dropped his bombshell. Crystal Cove wasn't just building a community center. They were constructing a massive resort on the East Bank, right beside my land. The crowd gasped over blueprints showing timber beams, a sprawling lawn, and a marina, all swallowing the shoreline. No one asked about the lake's health, the new roads, or how they'd claimed the shore in the first place. I sat there, silent, realizing this fight wouldn't be won with arguments. I needed a better plan. I went home and started documenting everything. Every fine, every photo of their trash on my land, every email. I studied property law, easements, and waterway rights. I waited, knowing greed always overreaches. 3 weeks later, The earth movers arrived, ripping through the East Bank like a war zone. Trees fell, trails vanished, and massive machines pounded steel into the ground for a 3-story event center. Debris littered my land, lumber, wrappers, even a porta-potty planted in my yard. I dragged it off, earning a $250 fine for moving HOA property. The fines piled up: $500 for construction debris, theirs, not mine, $750 for obstructing development. It was maddening, but I kept snapping photos, building my case. I found Victor once, overseeing workers in what used to be a quiet glade. I asked for a word, voice steady. He flashed a politician's grin, clapped my shoulder, and said, "This resort's going to make your shack worth a fortune. You'll thank me." I said I didn't want to sell. "Everyone's got a price," he smirked, turning away. The HOA's propaganda followed. Flyers boasting about Crystal Cove Resort, newspaper articles praising its economic benefits. They painted me as a selfish holdout, and neighbors started avoiding me. I thought about giving up, but Henry's words, "respect the lake," kept me grounded. I hired a lawyer, Sam Carver, a gruff man who loved to fight. I dumped my evidence on his desk, and he grinned like he'd found gold. Digging through old records, he uncovered an 1897 covenant tied to Clearwater Lake, buried in township files. It gave the owner of the eastern shore, my land, exclusive rights to the water, its minerals, and commercial access. Sam confirmed it was still valid. I didn't just own my acre, I controlled the lake. Every dock, every boat rental, every resort plan hinged on my permission, which they didn't have. Sam urged me to wait. If we sue now, they'd pivot. But if we let them finish the resort, sink millions into it, we could strike when it hurts most. So I waited. The resort grew, a gaudy sprawl of fake beams and manicured lawns. They built a marina, a fake beach, and booked weddings and retreats. Victor strutted like a king, oblivious to the trap. At the grand opening, banners waved, a band played, and Victor's speech dripped with self-praise. I clapped along, knowing my moment was coming. A week later, we filed. Sam's team hit them with everything: a quiet title action to enforce the covenant, injunctions against commercial use, challenges to every permit. The news exploded: legal threat to Crystal Cove Resort. Offers poured in from investors smelling blood. I held off, letting the bidding war climb. 7 figures became 8, then 9. Meanwhile, the HOA partied on, hosting weddings and concerts, every event proving that they were breaking the law on my lake. When the offer hit a number so big I could barely breathe, I told Sam to sell. A national resort chain bought my rights for hundreds of millions. Within hours, their lawyers shut down Crystal Cove's operations. Weddings were canceled, boats chained up, concerts silenced. Victor raged, calling emergency meetings, but it was over. They sued, claiming my rights were invalid, but Sam countersued, exposing their fraud, forged signatures, shady deals, and misused funds. The media turned, and headlines screamed corruption at Crystal Cove. Residents sued, home values crashed, and banks pulled financing. The resort was gutted, its event center razed, marina scrapped, fake beach erased. I watched from my porch, coffee in hand, as the lake healed. Geese returned, fish flashed in clear water, and wildflowers bloomed. The resort's ruins crumbled, swallowed by the woods. Victor fled, bankrupt and disgraced. The HOA collapsed, its leaders gone. I had my peace, my land, and a fortune. The lake was mine again, just as Henry said it should be. In the end, I didn't fight with fists or fire. I stood still, let their greed bury them, and walked away richer than I'd ever dreamed. Sitting in my canoe, watching the sunrise gild the water, I knew I'd outlasted them. And that was enough. What do you think? Was I right to wait and strike, or should I have fought harder from the start? How do you handle injustice or bullying in your life? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your take on standing up to greed and power. Let's get the conversation going.